hunter, or perhaps, for tonight, simply traveler. You don't need to grip the controller in your mind. You don't even have to stay awake until the end. All that's asked of you is to listen for a while, the way you might listen to a distant storm or to the muffled sound of rain on a roof. If your thoughts drift, that's all right. The story will keep going whether you follow every turn or not. Imagine the world has already gone quiet around you. The lamps are turned low. Whatever small noises usually fill your room have settled into the background. Over that hush will lay another, the night air around an old college, far from Yharnam's crowded streets. We are standing, only in our thoughts, among the trees that surround Byrgenwerth. The sky here is clear. Stars prick the darkness, steady and unblinking. Between the trunks, you can see the outline of a building, all sharp roofs and tall windows, half swallowed by ivy. The stone looks older than the city you left behind, as if it has been sitting here, thinking for a very long time. Behind it, something glimmers, the surface of a lake, catching the faint light of the moon. You can let your shoulders soften a little. You don't have to remember every name or every date. I'll keep the timeline simple, and whenever it threatens to knot itself, we'll smooth it back out again. If you like, you can even close your eyes and just hold on to three things: a college by a lake, a sky that is not yet red, and the sense that something important lies hidden just out of sight. Tonight's story follows a single thread through all of this. It is the story of Rom, the Vacuous Spider, and of the veil she kept over Yhar'gul. It is the story of the red moon that only appears after her death, and of what that moon reveals. Great ones hanging from the edges of buildings, secret rituals in hidden districts, and children who should never have been born. But we will come to those slowly. For now, we are still outside the college, listening to the night. If you picture the path in front of you, it is narrow and stone paved, lined with low walls. On the other side of those walls, the woods press close, branches leaning over like curious listeners. Fireflies drift above the grass, their small lights coming and going. Somewhere nearby, water laps gently at a shore you can't quite see. The building of Byrgenwerth sits at the end of this path, its doors closed, its windows dark. Once, this was where everything began. Long before the healing blood turned Yhar'gul into a place of miracles and beasts, scholars gathered here under Master Willem to study what lay beneath the city. Men were sent down into the labyrinth cut into the old Thumerian stone. They found strange things there, remnants of a civilization steeped in communion with beings they would call the Great Ones, and traces of a substance later known as the Old Blood. The discoveries were overwhelming. Some believed that by using the Old Blood, by weaving it into human veins, they could lift humanity upward. Others, led by Willem, thought that touching it directly would doom them. We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood. Those words would echo later in a vision of the past, but their roots are here, among the books and chests of this quiet college Byrgenwerth. For a time, tried a different path. Instead of injecting blood, Willem and his students turned to another kind of experiment. Invertebrates, phantasms, as they came to be called, were studied and collected. Empty shells sit even now in the college, small reminders that certain tiny, soft-bodied creatures can act as familiars of the great ones. Channels through which arcane power flows by placing such things close to the brain, or even within it. The scholars hope to line the brain with eyes and see beyond the ordinary world. You don't have to picture the procedures. It's enough to imagine the aftermath. Notes scattered across desks, diagrams of brain and eye and mollusk inked in careful lines, and students walking the halls with distant expressions, as if half their thoughts were somewhere else. Some of those students would later leave, following Lawrence into the city to found the healing church and its blood ministration. Others stayed, continuing Willem's slower, stranger pursuit of insight. Somewhere in these halls, at some point in that history, Rom's story begins. The game never lets us meet Rom in human shape. When we find her, she is already something other. A great pale body shaped more like a pillbug than a spider, studded with eyes, half buried in the silver surface of a lake lore. Notes call her the Byrgenwerth Spider, and a note not far from here complains that this spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. That is how the people of Yhar'gul hear about her, as a blocking presence, an obstacle between seekers and their goals. Later, in the nightmare, Mikolash will speak of Kos having once done something for the vacuous Rom, asking that same Great One to grant us eyes again. That line, and the way certain items tie phantasms, brains, and insight together, has led many lore readers to believe that Rom was once a scholar of Byrgenwerth, changed into a kin through contact with a Great One. The game never states this outright, but the pattern is there. Human eyes, transformation, then distance from ordinary people. In our telling, we will keep that as a gentle possibility. Rom may have been a person, once, who studied in these rooms, listening to Willem's lectures and staring at the lake through high windows, or she may always have been something closer to a Great One, merely drawn to Byrgenwerth's work. Either way, by the time the night of the hunt arrives, her role is clear. She is the one who holds a barrier in place. That barrier lies just beyond the college walls. If you imagine walking through the silent building now, past the abandoned desks, past shelves lined with dust, past portraits whose eyes follow you with empty curiosity, you come at last to a balcony overlooking the lake. The water is smooth, reflecting the pale moon in a broad, shimmering disk. There is no hint yet of red, no sign of the horrors that hang, unseen, over Yahar'nam's church spires. The air here feels different. Even in your imagination, you might notice a sense of pause, as if the world were taking a long, careful breath. The hunting in the city, the cries of beasts, the chants of scholars, all of that feels very far away. There is only you, the balcony, the old man in the chair who watches the lake in silence, and the water itself. You know, from having played or from having listened, that stepping into that water will not simply soak your boots. Moonside Lake is not just a pool behind a building. It is a small pocket apart from the rest of the world, a place where you can walk on the surface as if it were solid, under an open sky that feels more like a ceiling. When you cross into it, you leave behind the last remnants of Yharnam's ordinary night and enter a space that belongs first and foremost to Rom for a moment. Before we take that step, we can stay on the balcony. This is a good place to rest your thoughts, on the threshold between the human college and the non-human lake, between a sky that still looks honest and the sky that will come after, between a city that believes it understands its own sickness and the truth waiting to be uncovered. Rom's story and the story of the Red Moon will unfold from this point outward. It will reach back into Byrgenwerth's past, into Mikolash's nightmares, and forward into the lives of ordinary people who never set foot in the college at all. It will pass through a lake, a spider, a veil, and eventually a cry from a child who has never seen the waking world. But you do not have to hold all of that at once. Right now, all you need to imagine is this: an old college by a still lake, a scholar in a chair who has looked at that water for so long he no longer needs to speak, and out on the shining surface, far away and yet very close, something pale and many-eyed waiting beneath a sky that, for the time being, remains calm. You can stay, if you like, on the balcony a little longer. The night over Byrgenwerth is still gentle. The trees sway very slightly in the breeze. The lake below reflects the pale moon as a broken, trembling circle. Somewhere, a cricket chirps. If you let your thoughts slow, you can almost forget that anything more complicated than water and stone exists in this world. But the path of this story leads towards the shore. So in your imagination, you leave the old man in his chair and walk back down through the quiet college floorboards, creak in familiar patterns. A book lies open on a desk, its pages yellow with disuse. Beyond the doors, the night air feels cooler. The smell of damp earth and leaves grows sharper as you follow the gradual slope down towards the water. Byrgenwerth rests on higher ground. The path to the lake is a simple one: a set of stairs, a stretch of grass, a small wooden platform that juts out over the water. Lanterns burned here once, perhaps, when students came to watch the reflections and talk about the stars. Now, only the moon provides light, and it does so sparingly. The lake's Japanese name, in developer notes, calls it the lake before the moon. That is what it feels like as you draw closer, a body of water placed directly beneath the sky's face, like a mirror set before an eye. The surface is so smooth that it seems less like liquid and more like a pane of silver glass laid, impossibly, on the earth. You can see your imagined reflection there, small and dark, and above it, the pale disk of a moon that has not yet turned red. You take a breath. Then, because the story requires it, you step forward and do not sink. The transition into Moonside Lake is quiet. There is no splash, no cold shock. One moment, you are standing on the boards of the pier. The next, your weight is resting on something that feels like glass with a pulse, firm enough to hold you, soft enough to tremble slightly under each step. The air becomes stiller. Sound seems to fall away. Even the woods around Byrgenwerth feel distant now, as if you had walked not just onto the lake, but into a different layer of the night. Out in the distance, something pale breaks the surface. At first, it might be mistaken for a boulder or an odd drift of ice. As you walk, however slowly you prefer to imagine it, details begin to emerge. The shape is rounded and humped, larger than a person, but not so large as some beasts you have seen. The surface is smooth, segmented ever so slightly, like the back of some enormous pillbug. Closer still, you notice the growths. Pale, plant-like protrusions sprout from its upper surface. Clusters of what look like soft, translucent stalks, each tipped with a bulb that might be a bud or an eye, or something between the two. The front of the creature is dominated by a mask-like face, pitted, porous, its surface studded with many small, dark holes. Within some of those holes, eyes glint faintly, unfocused. This is Rom, the Vacuous Spider. She does not look like the spiders that scuttle in Yharnam's corners. She has no visible fangs, no articulated legs reaching high above the ground. Instead, she is a bulky, rounded body with small, tucked limbs beneath her, as if she were trying to fold herself into as little space as possible. Around her, however, the word spider makes more sense. Countless smaller, more conventional spider creatures crouch on the surface of the lake, clustered like a living ring. Rom herself is oddly still. She does not lunge when you approach. She does not roar. Her many tiny eyes do not track you with the sharp focus of a predator. She simply sits, breathing in slow, unseen movements, as if existing here in this half-world requires all of her attention. Vacuous, in her title, can mean empty, of thought, of intention, of ordinary understanding. Facing her, you might feel that emptiness, like a pressure in the air. Yahar'gul's people, or at least those who scribbled notes in moments of clarity, describe her more sharply. The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. That note, left in a study not far from here in the waking world, captures the frustration of someone who knows that Rom stands between them and something they want. A lost master, perhaps Mikolash or another scholar of Mensis, and the rituals they've hidden away. Another note upstairs in the college insists that the spider hides all manner of rituals, certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared. To those writers, Rom is not a neutral creature. She is an obstacle, a wall with a body. She protects someone and something by her very existence. And when players defeat her in the game, the world acknowledges that. The message, Ritual secret broken, seek the nightmare newborn appears, the red moon descends, and the city's hidden horrors step more fully into view. Lesser amygdalae become visible to all. Yahar'gul stops pretending to be just a prison and reveals its full ritual city shape. In our slow telling, we will reach that upheaval later. For now, standing on the lake, we are more interested in what it means for one being to be used as a veil. Think back to the tools and trinkets scattered around Byrgenwerth. Among them lies the empty phantasm shell, described as an empty invertebrate shell, said to be a familiar of a great one. The healing church, which grew out of Byrgenwerth's discoveries, is said to have found a great variety of invertebrates, or phantasms as they are called. Shells that still contain slime harbour arcane power and can be rubbed on weapons to imbue them with eldritch strength. The scholars learned, in other words, that soft-bodied, unassuming things can act as conduits. These phantasms are not impressive on the surface. They are small, often empty-looking. Yet they bridge the gap between human tools and a great one's power. By handling them, by studying them, by placing them near the brain, the scholars believed they could increase their insight, lining their minds with eyes that saw beyond mere blood and bone. Rom is a phantasm's logic taken to an extreme. She is classed by the game as kin, a category reserved for beings who are inhuman kin of the cosmos, brethren of the Great Ones. The kin cold blood she drops describes such blood as a thing touched by the eldritch truth touched upon long ago at Byrgenwerth. When you stand before her, you are not looking at a beast of the city or a mere animal. You are looking at a creature whose very nature has been altered by contact with the cosmic, until she has more in common with great ones than with humans. At some point, Mikolash will yell into the void, "Ah, Kos," or some say Kosum, "do you hear our prayers? As you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes, plant eyes on our brains to cleanse our beastly idiocy." From this line, many lore readers infer that some great one, perhaps Kos, was involved in Rom's transformation. The wording suggests that once, in the past, Rom was granted eyes, changed into a vacuous kin, and set to serve as a kind of living plug in the fabric of the world. It is important to note that the game never shows this process, never confirms Rom's human origin directly, but the connection, Byrgenwerth, phantasms, kin, and that pleading line about "as you once did," makes the theory feel possible. Whether you accept that interpretation or not, the result is the same. Rom is here, in the lake before the moon, acting as a buffer between Yharnam and the full sight of the Great Ones. Her vacuity may be the price of that role. To hold such a barrier in place might require that whatever sharp, human self she once had be smoothed away, leaving only the instincts of a creature whose thoughts are filled with nothing but the weight of what she's holding back. You can imagine, if you like, that the water around her is less lake and more membrane. Yharnam's sky on one side, with its pale, misleading moon, and the unfiltered reality on the other, amygdalae clinging to cathedrals, rituals burning hot in Yahar'gul, great ones leaning in closer. Rom lies where that membrane is thinnest, keeping the two apart. So long as she remains, ordinary citizens can go about their hunts and prayers without glimpsing the full shape of what hangs over them. If you have ever held something difficult back from someone you cared about, some hard truth you thought they weren't ready for, you might feel a faint echo of that posture in Romans. It is not that the truth is evil in itself. It is that the timing and the way it is given matter. Rom's presence delays the moment when Yharnam has to see. She gives them, and perhaps the scholars themselves, a little more borrowed time. Standing on Moonside Lake, you exist right at the edge of that borrowed time. Behind you lies Byrgenwerth, with its lectures about eyes and blood and evolution. Ahead lies the point where striking this quiet, bulbous creature will allow the sky's lie to fall away in the main path of the game. Players often reach this place with only a partial understanding of what Rom is doing. They see an odd boss, a wall between them and progress, and they do what hunters do. In this slower telling, you can pause before that moment. You can look at Rom and her ring of smaller spiders and consider that if vacuous means empty, it might also mean sacrificed, a mind emptied out to hold something else, a person hollowed so others can live without seeing what she sees. Or she might simply be an accident of experimentation, a side effect of the path Willem and his students chose. We can let that remain a soft question. Rom does not explain herself. The notes about her were written by others, some resentful, some frightened. The kin cold blood she drops was catalogued by those who thought of her as inhuman kin of the cosmos, not as a colleague. Mikolash's plea to Kos is a madman's prayer, not a scholarly report. All our pictures of her past are drawn from the outside. The only thing certain, standing here, is what she does now. She keeps the world soft for a little while longer. If your mind feels full, you can let some of these details drift away. You don't need to remember every line of every item description. Instead, you can hold a simpler image, a silver lake under a pale moon, a large, strange creature sitting very still on its surface, and the knowledge that, somewhere far above Yharnam's rooftops, a truer sky is waiting to shine through. The moment this quiet guardian is removed, soon we will turn away from the lake and look back at the city under Rom's unbroken veil to see what life is like when the worst truths are still blurred. For now, you may simply stand here on the water that is not water, listening to the soundless weight of her watch. Under the pale, dishonest moon, Yharnam goes about its night. From a high rooftop, the city looks almost peaceful. Chimneys exhale thin trails of smoke. Lanterns burn behind stained glass. The streets are mostly empty, save for the slow pacing of hunters and the shambling of beasts that once were neighbors. If you did not listen too closely, you could almost believe this was simply a sick city on a bad night. The sky, however, is not telling the truth. It hangs overhead in a washed-out white, the moon round and flat, its details muted. To the ordinary eye, there is nothing strange about it. People curse their illnesses, their neighbors, the beasts, the church, but not the moon. It is just another distant light, something to navigate by and blame in passing. You listening now know that this is not the whole story. Somewhere beyond that pale disk, a truer phase is waiting. A red moon that will stain stone and skin alike and reveal all kinds of things that currently pass unnoticed. For the moment, though, Rom's veil is still intact. The city exists under a sky made soft, its worst truths blurred. Inside their homes, people cling to small comforts. Bundles of incense smolder in metal cages, their smoke thick with the promise of protection. Children sleep in back rooms while parents whisper about hunts and curfews. Some households clutch at vials of church-sanctioned blood, the healing substance that has made Yhar'gul famous and damned, praying that their own dosage will cure rather than twist them. In the cathedral ward, the church maintains its higher facade. White-robed choir members move between sanctuaries, their footsteps echoing off carved stone. Lower-ranking clerics speak reassuringly about treatment and salvation. High above them, the true choir turns its gaze toward the stars, working on its own projects that have nothing to do with what ordinary patients need. And scattered between these layers, hunters move. Their boots clatter on the cobbles. Weapons scrape against door frames. Some are fresh to the night, still half believing that this is a matter of culling beasts and letting the sun rise on a calmer city. Others are older, their eyes a little too bright, their voices a little too thin, as if they had been listening to something only they can hear. The game gives this something a name: insight. Mechanically, insight is a number on a screen. In the world itself, it represents inhuman knowledge. How much of the nightmare's workings has managed to seep into a hunter's mind? Madman's knowledge describes it as the blessing and curse of contact with the wisdom of the Great Ones. Scholars and notes alike talk, in different ways, about eyes on the inside. The idea that as your understanding grows, new ways of seeing bloom inwardly, making it harder to ignore what was always there. You don't need to track specific values. Instead, you can think of insight as a slow turning of the head. With little or none of it, the city is just a city. Beasts in the streets, blood in the clinics, a slightly odd moon overhead. As insight rises, more details filter in. You begin to notice the whisper of voices in certain places, vivisections of reality becoming visible. Things perched on walls, chants in languages you don't speak, correspondences between the waking streets and the nightmares that overlap them. Even under Rom's veil, a sufficiently open mind can see a little more. Some hunters, if they accumulate enough insight, can make out the outline of vast, spidery beings clinging to the sides of cathedrals. Amygdalae, the long-limbed great ones whose presence in Yhar'gul is otherwise hidden. For most citizens, these monsters might as well not exist. For those with sharpened inner sight, their silhouettes begin to twitch at the edge of vision like stains that no longer blend into the stone. Rom Rom's work is not erased by this, it is only strained. From the way later events unfold, it can feel as though the blood moon is always there in the background, waiting to be seen, and that it only becomes visible to ordinary eyes once Rom is gone. Insight allows a rare few to catch hints ahead of time, but the general sky remains pale. The majority of Yhar'gul continues under its quieter lie, unaware that something heavy and unseen is already pressing against the fabric of their world. Down in the lower districts, something else moves among the alleys. Tall figures in dark robes wander slowly through Cathedral Ward and its outskirts, sacks slung over one shoulder. Their limbs are odd, too long, their right hands larger than they should be, and their faces are almost entirely hidden by hoods. These are the kidnappers, often called snatchers by those who have survived seeing them. They do not seek every passerby. Instead, they appear after certain events. The defeat of a great beast in the cathedral, a deepening of the hunt, and pounce on those unfortunate enough to cross their paths if a hunter falls to their blows, or if a citizen collapses under their sack. The victim does not die in any ordinary sense. Instead, consciousness returns in a different part of the city, in a place most Yhar'numites never even hear named the Hypergean Jail. The phrase itself means underground jail, and that is what the place is. A cramped prison carved into the depths of a hidden district. Cells line the walls, iron bars crusted with rust. Lanterns burn with a weak, sour light. Outside the barred windows, strange chants drift up from unseen courtyards. For the player, the first arrival here is a kind of rude awakening. For those who live in Yhar'gul, it is a fate they do not know to fear. The jail sits within an area called Yahar'gul, the unseen village. That name is not poetic, it is literal. The village truly is unseen by most, its existence hidden by distance, by church secrecy, and, more subtly, by the kind of veil Rom represents when you first arrive, dragged in a kidnapper's sack. The village outside the jail seems unnervingly empty. Strange statues crowd the streets, church servants and warped beasts patrol, but the larger structure of the place is still muffled, like a song heard through a wall. Near your cell in this early visit, a note lies on the floor. Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon, uncover their secrets. It is an unsettling line, but at first it may feel abstract. You have not yet seen the red moon. You do not yet know what beckoning it entails. All you know is that hidden work is being done somewhere in this village, and that its purpose is tied somehow to the sky itself. Another note found later will speak of nightmarish rituals, craving a newborn, and urge you to find one and silence its harrowing cry. For now, those warnings simply hang in the air. Community discussions and essays sometimes suggest that this early version of Yahar'gul may represent a slightly different moment in time than the later, fully awakened village. It is an appealing idea that your pre-blood moon visit lets you glimpse the area just before the ritual reaches its climax, and that after Rom's death, you return to see its aftermath. The game itself never spells this out. It only shows you two distinct states: a quieter jail, dominated by kidnappers and their captives, and a later Yahar'gul, where the dead line the walls and bells ring over reanimated flesh. The notion of stepping into its past remains a soft interpretation, not a confirmed rule. What is clear, even in this hushed earlier visit, is that Yahar'gul is a place of concentrated intention. Lines of robed figures stand in frozen prayer. Strange cages, similar to those later worn by the scholars of Mensis, hang from ceilings and windows at the edges of the jail. Chanting swells and fades, never loud enough to make out words, but loud enough to confirm that something is being asked for down here over and over. Above all of this, though you do not see it yet, hangs the pale, dishonest moon. Whether viewed from central Yharnam Cathedral Ward or the unseen village, it wears the same bland face. The blood moon it hides is not absent. It is merely withheld from ordinary perception. Rom's existence at Moonside Lake keeps it that way. Her presence is a kind of background process, constantly blurring the focus of the sky. If you were to imagine the world as overlapping layers, you might picture something like this. On the surface, a city full of beasts and hunters, under a pale moon. Beneath that, a hidden prison and village, where kidnappers deliver victims to fuel rituals that beckon the moon. Beneath even that lies the old labyrinth and the Pthumerian civilization that first dealt with great ones, and hanging above all these layers, only visible to those with enough insight or once Rom is gone. The true shape of Yharnam's heavens. Most people only see the first layer. A few unlucky souls get dragged into Yahar'gul and see the second. Scholars and hunters with too much insight brush against the third. Rom drifts on her lake and keeps the uppermost layer from burning through all the rest at once. In this part of the story, before we return to the Silver Lake, it is worth pausing on how quietly horror can live inside routine. The citizens of Yhar'gul lock their doors, light their incense, and complain about the beasts they do not know about kidnappers carrying neighbors away to an unseen village. They do not know about notes on stone floors warning of madmen beckoning the moon. They certainly do not know that their sky is already stained in a color only some can see. From their perspective, the night is terrible, but understandable. From yours, hovering outside the game, or listening in the dark, it is a night held in suspension by a single, vacuous guardian. Under a college balcony, Yharnam's people have no idea they are living in the pause before a sentence that will change everything. Soon, we will go back to the lake before the moon and watch that pause end. For now, if you are feeling tired, you can let the details of streets and cells blur a little. Just remember a few simple images: a pale, dishonest moon above, a hidden jail where a note speaks of madmen and the moon, and a city that does not yet know how close its sky is to showing its true color. Back on the lake before the moon, the pause finally breaks. You are still standing on that silver surface in your mind, the water firm beneath your feet, the air holding its breath. Rom sits ahead, rounded and still, ringed by her smaller, more frantic kin. For a while, nothing moves. The pale, dishonest moon that hangs over Yhar'gul is held in place by her presence, and the city continues unknowingly under a gentler lie. But hunters do what hunters do. You can imagine the clash in whatever way feels softest. There is no need for sharp sounds or sudden motions here. Perhaps you see it as a series of far-off shapes, yourself as a small figure weaving carefully between the clustered spiders, Rom shuddering and shifting in slow phases, the surface of the lake rippling with each unseen impact. Her spells bloom outwards like quiet bursts of light, not explosions, and the spiderlings scuttle in patient patterns rather than frenzied swarms. Rom herself never speaks. She never roars or curses or pleads. Her body shakes sometimes. The strange bud-like stalks on her back quiver. At certain points she pulls herself away, vanishing in a burst of pale light, and reappearing further out on the lake, pulling her ring of smaller guardians with her. Phase by phase, she becomes more frantic, more desperate in the way she calls on the power around her, but her mouth never forms a word. Eventually, there is a moment when her bulk can no longer rise again. The last of her strength leaves her. Her limbs, those small, almost hidden legs beneath her shell, go still. The many eyes embedded in her mask-like face, dull and cloud. The water around her returns to its earlier calm, as if the lake itself were relieved of a weight it had been holding for too long. The veil breaks. You may feel it first as a change in the air, a loosening, followed by a rush. Somewhere else in the world, something that has been held back begins to pour through. Where Rom once sat, the surface of the lake darkens for a heartbeat. Above, the sky that has always seemed distant and pale shifts its color, as though a filter has been lifted from before your eyes. It is only when you move closer to where Rom's body lies that the change is fully shown to you. Standing on the lake, near what remains of the Vacuous Spider, another figure appears, a tall woman in a white dress, stained heavily with blood around the stomach. Her hands hang at her sides. A veil lies over her face, hiding her features, but you can see enough to know that her eyes are fixed on something far above. This is Yhar'gul, Thumerian Queen. She does not acknowledge you directly. Instead, in the cutscene the game shows, she looks up slowly, and the camera follows her gaze. The sky above is no longer the washed-out disk you saw from Yhar'gul's rooftops. It is dominated now by a red moon, swollen and close, its color deep and unsettling. Somewhere, faint but unmistakable, a baby begins to cry. The Queen's presence, here of all places, ties the moment together. She is the mother of Mergo, the unseen child whose cry echoes through the nightmare of Mensis. Her appearance as the blood moon descends suggests that what you have just done, killing Rom, has not only broken a ritual secrecy, but also cleared the way for a long-delayed tragedy to unfold. The veil has been torn, and the consequences immediately begin to seep into both the waking world and the nightmares that hang just above it. Then the lake, the queen, and the corpse of Rom fall away. You awaken in a new place, still in your mind's quiet, but in the game. In a dark, shrouded chapel, stone pillars rise around you. Dust motes drift in thin beams of red-tinged light. At the far side of this small hall, a great door waits, and beyond it, the sound of bells filters through. On the screen, a brief message appears. Ritual secret broken. Seek the nightmare newborn. It is not spoken by anyone you can see. It feels more like a caption for the world itself, announcing that the quiet part of the night is over. You are standing at the entrance to Yahar'gul, the unseen village in its fully awakened state, the place where madmen have been toiling surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon. Now, with Rom gone, their work has borne fruit. Outside the chapel, the sky is different. The blood moon hangs low, its face large and heavy. Its red light spills down into the streets, painting stone, statues, and flesh in shades of rust and wine. Where before only those with high insight could glimpse certain horrors, now they are laid bare for everyone to see. Lesser amygdalae cling openly to the walls of the Grand Cathedral and other towering structures, their spider-like bodies illuminated in full, no longer half-hidden or invisible except to sharper minds. Yharnam under the blood moon is not quite the same city you left doors, that once responded with angry voices when you knocked, now yield only wet, incoherent sounds, or nothing at all. Many windows are dark. Certain NPCs can no longer be reached. Others have shifted into new, more desperate states. In Erdene Chapel, the handful of survivors you sent there speak in altered tones. Ariana, if she is present, has begun to clutch her abdomen, the first signs of a pregnancy that will only fully reveal itself as the night goes on, back in Yahar'gul. The changes are even more severe. The Hypergean jail, that earlier, half-hidden jail, is no longer a functioning hub. The old lamp there goes dark. Instead, you emerge into the full, unseen village. Streets lined with petrified corpses, their bodies fused into walls and piled in corners like offerings. Bell-ringing women move slowly among them, their chimes waking horrors out of these masses of flesh. Huntsmen and beasts here are warped beyond what you saw elsewhere, their forms stretched and amalgamated, as if the ritual that beckoned the moon has also torn at the edges of their humanity. All of this unfolds beneath that same oppressive red sky. The note you saw in the jail. Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon, now reads less like a distant warning and more like a summary of what has already happened. The moon is here. The veil that Rom represented has been lifted. The line between waking city and nightmare realm grows faint. Great ones, drawn by the rituals and by the blood, lean closer. A lore note from Byrgenwerth comes to mind. When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child. You have now seen the first half of that prophecy in motion. The between man and beast blurs in Yahar'gul, in the way corpses and buildings merge, in the way enemies twitch and reform under the bells. Soon you will see the second half. Wombs blessed or cursed with children that should not exist. Mergo cries from the nightmare of Mensis. Ariana bends over in Eden Chapel. Somewhere in all this, the red moon that once hovered behind Rom's veil has become the sky's dominant truth. For now, though, you can stay with a simpler picture. Rom is gone. The blood moon has descended. You stand, in imagination, at the threshold of a chapel, looking out at a village that was once unseen and is now horribly fully present. Above you, the great red disk presses down, heavier than any cloud. On the screen, the brief message has faded, but its meaning lingers. The secret is broken, and the thing that was once hidden, the nightmare newborn, is calling across the widening gap between worlds. If all of that feels like a lot to hold, you can let most of it soften. You do not need to remember every change in every street. You do not need to walk all of Yahar'gul's alleys in your head. It is enough to keep a few images gently in place. Yharnam's ordinary night under a pale, lying moon. Rom's still body on the silver lake. Queen Yharnam looking up as the sky turns red. And the moment when you wake in a shadowed chapel with new bells ringing in the distance. The veil that once spared the city has been removed. From here on, everything we see in Yahar'gul and beyond will be lit by that red light. Under the blood-red moon, Yhar'nam feels both familiar and wrong. The same streets run in the same directions. The same towers claw at the sky. The same statues lean out over the plazas, their stone eyes fixed on the world below. And yet, the color of everything has changed. That gentle, pale light that once made the city look sick, but manageable, has been replaced by a heavy crimson glow. It presses down on rooftops and settles into alleyways, turning every surface into a kind of wound. If you let the picture soften in your mind, you might see only the glow line after line of houses washed in red. Lantern glass tinted the color of old blood. Even the few remaining pools of water in the gutters reflecting a thick, dark version of the moon that hangs overhead. It is no longer possible to pretend that the sky is ordinary. In the unseen village, the change is even harsher. Yahar'gul streets, which once held only patrolling kidnappers, scattered beasts, and the muffled sound of chanting, are now crowded with something else entirely. At certain corners and in long corridors between buildings, you can see bodies, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, fused into the stone itself. They reach upward, fingers straining, as if frozen mid-panic. Some are pressed flat against walls, others piled and melded together into lumpy columns. The bell-ringing women move among them. Hooded and slight, they raise their strange chimes and set them swinging. Each ring sends a ripple through the air, and the bodies respond. Limbs twitch, heads loll. In some places, amalgams of flesh pull themselves free. A cluster of arms and legs where one creature should be, or coffin-bound masses that shudder forward like nightmares made literal. In others, The corpses remain part of the architecture, but something in the way they lean suggests they are listening. It is not clear in the game itself exactly whose ritual this is. The School of Mensis uses this village as a base. Their mummified bodies will later be found gathered in a small chapel here. The bell-ringing women resemble older necromancers from the Thumerian labyrinth beneath the city. Many readings of item descriptions and notes describe what happens in Yahar'gul as a hybrid of Mensis experiments and Thumerian rites. The result, whatever its precise authorship, is plain to see. The dead of Yharnam and the surrounding region have been pulled here, bound together, and made to move under the red moon's gaze. You can imagine walking slowly through one of these streets. The ground is slick in places. The red moon's light catches on wet patches you might prefer not to name. Occasionally, you pass a familiar figure, or at least a familiar outline, an enemy type you have seen elsewhere in the city. Now altered, limbs are longer. Skin is darker or paler than before. In some cases, it is hard to tell where one once human shape ends and another begins. The bells keep ringing, the air thick with their thin metallic notes. All of this feels like an answer to that earlier warning. Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon uncover their secrets. Once, you read that line on a note outside your cell in Hypergean jail. The ritual was something happening elsewhere, behind stone and secrecy. Now you are standing in the afterglow of its success. The blood moon has been beckoned. With Rom gone, her softening veil removed, its full color floods the city. The people used as components in that work are now trapped in its consequences. The road through Yahar'gul leads eventually to a wide plaza. This is Advent Plaza, the chosen place, as later descriptions call it, for a particular birth. It is a broad, open space ringed by arches and balconies. Carriages stand abandoned in rows, wheels askew, as if their passengers were taken mid-journey. At either side of the plaza, spiral staircases curl upward to a gallery that runs around the arena's edge. Up there, if you look closely, you can see them. 6 bell-ringing women, 3 on each side, positioned with deliberate care. In the center of the plaza, at first, there is nothing, just red light and empty stone. The air hums with the resonance of 6 bells, their overlapping chimes forming a pattern your ears cannot quite separate. Then, gradually, something begins to happen in the sky. The red moon swells or blurs, and a darker patch blooms in front of it, like ink dropped into water. That stain widens and deepens until it becomes a portal, and from that portal something falls. It is not a clean fall. Chunks of flesh and bone tumble down, followed by more, then more, until a single monstrous shape lands in the center of the plaza with a wet, echoing impact. Limbs splay outward in every direction. Legs that look stolen from giants, beasts, and men, all fused at the root. Arms that end in hands or claws or stumps. a central mass dominated by a long skeletal torso that seems to have been placed on top as an afterthought. This is the One Reborn. You can let your imagined view stay at a distance if you prefer. The specifics of where each bone or organ comes from are less important than the overall impression. A heap of bodies that has been forced into coherence. As it stirs, organs pulse along its underside. The long torso on its crown writhes and points, channeling arcs of power that call down showers of corpses or waves of energy. From the galleries, the bell-ringing women continue to chime, their projectiles lancing down into the plaza, sometimes striking the mass below, as well as any intruder. Official descriptions and guides say little outright about what the One Reborn is meant to be. Some sources summarize it as the final result of an unholy experiment in Yahar'gul, an attempt to raise humankind toward the status of the Great One's others, drawing on Yahar'gul's notes about madmen and the presence of bell-ringing women. Describe it as a vessel assembled from the village's dead, a kind of artificial god created through necromancy and blood ritual rather than through any true understanding of the cosmos. A common community reading, based on how tightly Yahar'gul's story is tied to Mergo and Queen Yharnam, is that this vessel may have been intended for Mergo's use, or as an echo of Thumerian methods of hosting great ones. The game itself leaves this unspoken, but the connections are there to be inferred. Whatever their intentions, the result is not a serene, ascended being. The One Reborn is restless and grotesque, a thing that never quite finds a stable balance. Its many legs stomp, flail, and drag. The torso at its top seems both in command and in pain, flinging arcane attacks across the plaza as if trying to claw its way free from the mass beneath. The bell maidens above send streams of dark energy into it between fireballs, as though feeding and sustaining it. But their efforts only make the spectacle more unsettling. In your mind, you do not need to focus on the fight itself. You might simply see yourself as a tiny figure moving through the plaza, occasionally vanishing up one of the staircases to still the bells, then returning to circle the heaving core of the creature. Each time its legs collapse under the weight, it slumps forward, exposing softer parts that can be struck. Eventually, its movements slow, the spells lose their sharpness. The torso on top droops, then hang limp. When the One Reborn finally dies, it does not vanish cleanly. The piles of flesh that once made up its body seem to slump further, some of them falling apart into motionless heaps. The bells above fall silent as the women who rang them crumple where they stand. The air that once seemed thick with the residue of the ritual feels, if not pure, then at least a little less charged. In the plaza, there are still bodies, still blood, still reminders of what was attempted here, but the central experiment has ended. At the far end of Advent Plaza, there is a small chapel. Inside, under the red light filtering through high windows, you find the members of the School of Mensis. Their bodies are slumped in their seats or piled together, as lifeless as the offerings outside. In their midst, propped like a grotesque centerpiece, is a wrapped, mummy-like form. the corpse of Mikolash, host of the nightmare. The ritual in the village seems to have cost them everything. If you picture yourself walking down that aisle, your footsteps echo softly. Dust hangs in the air. There is no sound of chanting now, no scratching of pens, no muttered arguments about eyes and blood. Only stillness and the faint impression that whatever minds these scholars once had are now elsewhere. When you reach Mikolash's body and touch it, the world around you dissolves, not in a jolt, but like fog closing in. When the fog clears, you are no longer in Yahar'gul at all. You stand in the lecture building, a dark wooden hall lined with desks and slumped scholars. It is a place that feels like Byrgenwerth's echo, a dream college suspended between waking city and deeper nightmare. Ascending through this building will eventually deliver you to the nightmare of Mensis itself, where the brain of Mensis hangs from a tower and Mergo's presence can be confronted more directly. For tonight, you do not need to walk those halls yet. It is enough to linger at the threshold between the chapel of dead Mensis scholars and the dream lecture hall that lies behind you in imagination. Advent Plaza lies quiet, its chosen one no longer breathing. Above it, the blood moon still hangs, but one of the city's most desperate attempts to manufacture its own god has failed. Rom's absence made this possible. While she lived on the lake before the moon, the ritual in Yahar'gul could not reach its full expression. With her gone, the bells rang, the moon answered, and the one reborn fell from the sky. In destroying that creature, you have not undone the blood moon or the deeper nightmare. That work lies ahead. But you have severed one visible strand of humanity's attempt to drag itself, by sheer force of will and blood, into the rank of the great ones. If your mind feels crowded at this point, you can let some of these structures blur. You do not have to remember every stairway in Yahar'gul or every attack the one reborn can perform. You can hold instead to a gentler sequence of images, a red-lit village full of fused bodies and bells, a plaza where a ritual birth goes wrong, a chapel full of scholars who reach too far, and a quiet hall beyond, waiting to introduce you to the nightmare they joined. The red moon remains above all of it, patient and unblinking. The lecture building feels like a memory that does not quite belong to you. It is dark here, but not in the way of Yhar'nam's streets. There are no howling beasts, no clatter of hooves. Instead, the air is thick with old chalk dust and the smell of wood that has soaked in ink and sweat for too many years. Desks stand in crooked rows. Lanterns cast small puddles of light on scuffed floorboards. Scholars' bodies sit slumped where they once studied, as if a lesson simply stretched on and on until they forgot how to stand. You can move through this place slowly. Down one corridor, a lecture hall opens out. Benches rise in tiers. At the front of the room, a blackboard still bears faint traces of diagrams, circles and lines like orbits, suggestions of eyes and arcs, wiped but not fully gone. Further along, in a quieter corner, a scrap of paper lies on the floor, its ink still legible. Master Willem was right. Evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race. The hand that wrote it is not important tonight. Some say it might be Lawrence's, written in a moment of clarity or doubt. Others think it came from a lesser scholar, trying to reconcile Willem's warnings with their own desire to ascend. The game does not tell us, it only lets us see that someone stood here, in this nightmare echo of a school, and decided that change without bravery would break them all. You do not need to untangle their philosophy. For our purposes, the note simply reminds us how tightly these people bound themselves to the idea of evolution. They wanted eyes inside their heads, insight lining their brains, a way to stand closer to the great ones who moved at the edges of their understanding. Byrgenwerth tried one path. The Healing Church tried another. The School of Mensis, which now claims this lecture building as its own, chose a more reckless one. The building itself feels displaced. Its architecture resembles Byrgenwerth's: vaulted ceilings, wooden beams, classrooms built for quiet study. Yet it hangs in a space that is not quite the waking world. Doors out of its halls do not lead back to the Yhar'gul you know. They open instead onto stone paths that do not match any normal map, into a sky that looks like the city's, but is somehow too close, too sharp. Some law readers imagine the lecture building as Mensis's dream of a college, a place where their minds gather while their bodies sit elsewhere. The game leaves that relationship soft and strange. You are simply told that this is the lecture building, and beyond it lies the nightmare of Mensis. When you pass through the far doors, the world opens. You find yourself on a rocky outcrop under the red moon, with jagged stone rising all around like teeth. In the distance, towers tilt and lean, built of the same dark rock, their windows hollow and bright with an unhealthy light. Long bridges span chasms that drop away into swirling mist. Somewhere, faint but insistent, a baby cries. The nightmare of Mensis is not a copy of Yhar'gul. It is more like a knot made from all the thoughts and fears of the school that bears its name. Any sense of ordinary streets has been twisted into steep paths, broken staircases, and precarious ledges. Hunters who step here leave the city stone behind and walk instead through the students' worst imaginings. Made solid, the red moon that hangs over Yhar'gul shines here as well. But its light falls on things that never quite belonged in the waking world. As you move forward in your imagination, the cry grows a little clearer, not loud, not close, but more defined. Between those thin wails, another sound begins to press on your senses, a low, drumming throb, like a heartbeat heard through too much cloth. It does not come from any visible source at first. Instead, you feel it as a pressure behind the eyes, a kind of silent shouting that makes you want to look away from certain directions. One long bridge serves as introduction. Crossing it, you notice that looking towards a particular tower at the far end is painful, not in your skin, but in your mind. In the game, this is the brain of Mensis's frenzy gaze, building towards a breaking point each time it falls on you. In this telling, you can soften it. Imagine only that staring too long in that direction makes the back of your thoughts feel hot, like a book left too near a fire. You learn, instinctively, to move under cover, to break line of sight, to trust that something up there is watching. Eventually, you come to understand what it is. The path winds around crags and through narrow arches until you find yourself standing on a platform, looking out at a structure built into the cliff chains, hang from its upper reaches, disappearing into the darkness above. Suspended from those chains is an immense shape, swaying gently, a massive brain, all folds and ridges, its surface slick and glistening. At the base of this organ sprout long, limp limbs, each ending in a hand that hangs uselessly in the air. Along its curves, countless eyes sit half-buried, unblinking and wet. This is the brain of Mensis. The game treats it as an enemy and a great one both. One item description, attached to the living string you can later obtain from within it, explains that the immense brain that Mensis retrieved from the nightmare was indeed lined with eyes on the inside, but they were of an evil sort, and the brain itself was terribly rotten. But even still, it was a legitimate great one, and left a relic, a living relic at that, which is a precious thing indeed. The School of Mensis, in other words, found this thing in the nightmare and dragged it here, hoping to use it as a source of insight. Some interpretive essays go further. They suggest that the brain might even be a kind of collective organ, born from the gathered minds of the Mensis scholars when they projected themselves too deeply into the nightmare. The extra limbs, the many eyes, the rotted flesh. These details are taken as signs of human thought twisted into Great One form. This is an appealing reading, and it fits with the way Mensis tried to emulate Byrgenwerth's eyes on the inside. But it remains speculation. The game itself only tells us that the brain was retrieved from the nightmare, and that it qualifies somehow as a great one. What is clear, standing here, is the effect it has on anyone who looks at it. Its gaze is not the gaze of an animal. It is a field, an atmosphere. The frenzy it causes in the game represents a mind overloaded by contact with something it cannot process. In this quieter telling, you can think of it as a pressure that builds whenever you give it too much of your attention. The more you stare at the brain of Mensis, the more your thoughts feel like they are being pushed out of your skull to make room for someone or something. Else's Mensis wanted this. They thought that by bathing their minds in this presence, by surrounding themselves with eyes, they could push humanity forward. Master Willem was right, the law note said. Evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race. Their courage took the form of standing under a brain that eats sanity and calling it enlightenment. You, as hunter, take a different approach. Instead of remaining under its gaze, you find the means to bring the brain down. Somewhere along the path, higher up in the nightmare's twisting architecture, you locate a mechanism, a device that, when triggered, sends the great mass plummeting from its tower. In the game, this is a practical puzzle. In the story, it is a symbolic act. You cut the scholar's chosen source of insight loose, letting it fall into the depths below. Later, By following hidden paths, you can reach the place where the brain landed there, in a dark chasm beneath the main region of Mensis. The great organ lies crumpled, no longer broadcasting madness across the stone. Its limbs twitch weakly. Its many eyes, once oppressive, now seem almost plaintive. You are given the option to approach without fear, to offer a gesture, a bow, a display of respect or sorrow, and receive from it the living string, that strange relic that proves it was, indeed, a great one. Even defeated, the brain has a role to play. Its fall quiets one part to the nightmare's noise. The incessant throbbing at the back of your thoughts eases. The frenzy that once lurked just beyond every glance relaxes its grip. Yet the baby's cry continues. The true nightmare newborn has not yet been faced. The brain was a tool, perhaps, or a misguided attempt to harness the same kind of transformation that once turned Rom into a living veil. Mensis sought eyes. They found something rotten. When you climb back up out of the chasm and return to the higher paths of the nightmare, the route shifts bridges that were once guarded by that invisible pressure now feel strangely open. You pass tall stone figures, some animate, some merely carved, their faces hidden in sacks or masks. The cry grows clearer with each ascent, not louder in a jarring way, but more defined, as if the walls themselves were thinning between you and its source. Eventually, the path leads you to a courtyard. Here, under the red moon, a familiar figure waits. A woman in a white dress, stained dark at the stomach, a veil over her face, hands hanging at her sides. Queen Yharnam stands before the great tower that houses Mergo's loft, her posture stiff and sorrowful. In this place, in the nightmare of Mensis, she lifts her veil and weeps blood. Acknowledging your approach, she does not speak. She simply points, or gestures, or stands, as if to say that what lies above is the cause of all this crying. She is the mother of Mergo, the unseen infant whose wail has threaded through so much of this part of the story. Whether she sees you as rescuer, intruder, or something in between, the game does not say. Her bow after Mergo's wet nurse falls can be read as gratitude, grief, or both. For now, her presence here marks a boundary. Behind you lie Yahar'gul's failed vessel and Mensis's fallen brain. Ahead lies the cradle of the nightmare itself. A narrow ascent winds up into the tower. In the game, this is Mergo's loft, divided into lower and middle reaches, full of hostile figures and hazards. In our gentler view, you might imagine only that you are climbing a long, spiraling path, the sound of the child's crying following you, wrapping around the stone like mist. There are enemies here, yes, but you can let them fade into distant silhouettes. The important thing is the direction, upward, toward the lunarium where the guardian waits. By the time you reach the last of these stairs, the crying feels very near. You stand before a fog gate in your mind, its edges soft and fluttering. The red moon's light filters in from above, turned almost purple by the thickness of the air. Behind that veil, Mergo's wet nurse watches over a crib you have not yet seen. We will not cross that threshold again here. We have already walked through it and watched the Guardian fall. Instead, you can imagine pausing at this doorway, feeling the shape of everything that led here. Rom's silent vigil on the lake before the moon. Yahar'gul's stitched together god. Mensis's hanging brain. And now, a mother and her child, caught in a nightmare that cannot end on its own. When you are ready, you can let this tower and its cries soften, knowing that, in the story, you have already stepped through and brought Mergo's sleep and the nightmare of Mensis to a close somewhere far above Yharnam, in the place where the nightmare knots itself tightest. The crying finally stops. You have already walked, in your thoughts, through the fog of Mergo's loft. You have already stepped into the wet nurse's lunarium and faced the tall, shrouded figure that guards an unseen crib. In the game, steel and quicksilver and timing decide that battle. Here, tonight, you can let all of that fight sit at a distance, like the memory of a storm already past. What matters is the moment afterward. In that strange, elevated room, under the red moon's looming face, the Guardian falls. Layers of fabric and shadow collapse inward. The many blades go still for a heartbeat. The world holds its breath. Then the sound that has followed you from Rom's lake to Mensis's tower, the thin, insistent wailing of a child you have never seen, begins to fade. It does not cut off in a jolt. It tapers. The pitch softens, wavers, and then, at last, slips into silence. Only when the last echo of the cry dies away does the world give its verdict. Not prey slaughtered, as it has so many times before, but nightmare slain. The words themselves are gentle enough, but they carry a heavy meaning. This particular dream, this branch of the Great One's work, has come to an end. Mergo is never shown to you. You do not see a body in the crib, or a shape vanish when the wet nurse falls. You are only allowed to infer from the way the sound stops, and from the way Queen Yharnam responds in the lunarium, or in the walkway outside. She appears once more, the white-dressed woman with blood at her middle, the Pthumerian queen who first tried to carry a Great One's child. She looks toward the crib, then toward you, and bows. Blood tears streak from beneath her veil. Gratitude, grief, resignation, any or all of those could live inside that gesture. The game leaves it unsaid. You simply feel that something long delayed has finally happened. With Mergo's cry silenced, one prophecy has been fully acted out. When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the Great Ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child. You have seen the first half of that note in Yahar'gul's fused bodies, and Yharnam's beasts here in Mensis's tower. You have seen the second half come and go. A womb, Queen Yharnam's, was once blessed or cursed with a child that existed more in nightmare than in the waking streets. That child's presence, carried on its cry, shaped the entire nightmare of Mensis. Now, at least for a time, that shaping is over. The red moon, however, still hangs over the city. Even as Mensis's nightmare slackens, its light continues to fall on Yhar'gul's stones. And under that light, another womb has been carrying out its own, quieter fulfillment of the same rule while you were walking through the lecture building and Mensis. Someone else was groaning in a hidden corner of Cathedral Ward, far from the loft and the brain and the halls of scholars. Her name is Ariana. You might remember her first as a woman on a stoop in central Yhar'gul, well dressed despite her circumstances, with a manner different from the other, harsher citizens. If you spoke to her and offered the refuge of Edon Chapel, she eventually rose from her seat and made her careful way through the streets, trusting the kindness of a stranger more than the promises of the church. For a while, you could find her sitting near the chapel's lamp. She would thank you for sending her there, offer you a small curtsy, and press into your hands a vial of her blood. Blood of Ariana, described as a rare, refined sort, a blessed mixture that can restore health and perhaps carry a hint of something more. Each time you took and used it, she would offer more, until the night grew long and the moon grew red when Rom dies and the blood moon descends. Ariana's story changes. She no longer feels safe sitting near the light. Instead, she moves down into the shadows beneath the chapel, finding a narrow, hidden place in the stone. By the time you visit her there, if you follow her steps, she is hunched over, dress-stained, whispering about the pain in her belly. The red moon's rule about blessed wombs is working on her now, just as it once did on Queen Yharnam. Whatever has been growing inside her is ready to be born. In that cramped passage, the birth has already happened. Ariana sits slumped against the wall, legs splayed, blood pooled around her. Her voice has lost its earlier poise. She speaks as if in a fever, somewhere between confusion and shock. Just beyond her, in the dim light, something small and slick writhes on the stones. It does not look like a human baby. It has more in common with the pale, shelled kin of the cosmos. A tiny, slug-like being, soft and glistening, crying in a way that is more suggestion than sound. The game calls it Ariana's child. If you approach, you are given a choice. You can walk past, leaving mother and infant to their ambiguous fate, or you can raise your weapon and end the new life there on the floor. Doing so yields another piece of the same pattern that has run through all these stories. A third umbilical cord. Its description explains that every infant Great One has this precursor to the umbilical cord, and adds a detail that ties Ariana's small tragedy to the oldest forces in Yhar'gul. Every Great One loses its child, and then yearns for a surrogate, and Erden, the formless Great One, is no different. To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. Erden is not a figure you ever see. He exists as voice, presence, and rune. Formless Erden, whose description speaks of a Great One without body, whose essence is the oozing blood itself. And Erden writhe, which hints at blood-tinged phantoms gathering where bodies fall. All of these texts, taken together, paint a picture of a deity that never takes visible shape, but moves constantly through blood, human, beast, or otherwise, human or no. The formless Eden rune says, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade, and the essence of the formless Great One, Idon. Lore readers often connect these dots. Queen Yharnam's stillborn Great One child, Mergo, Ariana's unexpected pregnancy, and her child's cord that explicitly mentions Wedden's yearning for a surrogate. The way Wedden Chapel sits at the heart of Cathedral Ward, a place where blood is exchanged and worshipped. Each of these suggests that Eden, the invisible god of blood, has been trying again and again to achieve parenthood through mortal wombs. The game never presents this as a clear, narrated chain of events. It leaves you instead with overlapping hints, notes, rune texts, chord descriptions, and the sight of two different women brought low under the same red moon. For tonight, we can treat those connections as a pattern, not a verdict. Mergo's presence in Mensis's nightmare, Ariana's child in the tunnels beneath Eden Chapel, even the long-dead infant in the abandoned workshop whose cord helped conceive the hunter's dream. All of them fit under the line. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. Some chords precipitate the encounter with the pale moon, and the birth of a dream others grant audience with Mergo, but result in the stillbirth of their brains. Ariana's chord begins with a different emphasis, naming Erdon and corrupted blood as the start of her entanglement. There is a human meaning inside all this cosmic repetition. People in Yhar'gul reach for blood to heal and to strengthen themselves, not realizing they are also offering themselves as instruments to beings that see their bodies as vessels, Great Ones, unable to keep their own children, reach down through that same blood again and again in search of surrogates. The result is a series of births and stillbirths scattered across the city, some in hidden laboratories, some in nightmare towers, some in quiet chapels, some in dank tunnels beneath the streets. Rom's veil, while it lasted, kept much of this from unfolding all at once. So long as she sat patiently on Moonside Lake, the red moon that drives these liaisons could only press faintly on Yhar'nam's world. Queen Yharnam's story had already run its earlier course, deep in Pthumerian time, but Ariana's had not yet reached its crisis. The blood moon's full descent, triggered by Rom's death, turned what might have been a slow, scattered pattern into a single, terrible night of convergence. You might picture the city now as a series of faint lights slowly going out. In the loft of Mensis, the wet nurse has fallen, and Mergo's cry has faded, taking that nightmare with it. In the unseen village, the bells around the corpse heap god have gone quiet, and the one reborn lies still. In the tunnels under Cathedral Ward, Ariana slumps in post-birth exhaustion, her child's small body either squirming weakly or already cold. In the abandoned workshop, dust gathers around an empty crib. In Eden Chapel, the survivors shift uneasily, sensing changes they cannot name. What began with a spider on a silent lake has spread into every corner of Yharnam's relationship with the Great Ones. A shield has been removed. A red moon has been allowed to show its true face. Rituals have reached their intended or unintended ends. Wombs have been blessed and emptied. The cords left behind, 3/3 of an impossible whole, wait quietly in your inventory, each carrying a different phrase of the same truth about loss, yearning, and the cost of trying to step beyond human limits. If these details feel heavy, you can let them loosen. You do not need to remember exactly which cord came from which place. You do not have to hold the full genealogy of great ones in your head. You can keep a softer outline instead. A crying child whose voice once held a nightmare together. A woman in white who bows in bloody gratitude. Another woman in fine clothes reduced to ragged gasps in a stone tunnel. And an unseen god of blood coloring all their stories. Somewhere above all this, the red moon has begun, very slowly, to lose a little of its intensity. It is not gone yet. The night is not finished, but some of the threads that held it in place have been cut. The nightmare of Mensis is slain. Certain births and experiments cannot be repeated in quite the same way. In time, another sky will rise over Yhar'gul, even if only for a while. For now, you can rest on the thought that the worst of the Red Moon's work, the births and bargains that depended on secrecy, has passed. Rom's absence has let these events surge to their conclusion. Mergo's cry is quiet. Ariana's suffering has peaked. Aiden's search for surrogates, for this night at least, has reached another bittersweet end. And you, listening in the dark, carry none of their burdens. You only carry their echoes, gentle and distant. Like the memory of a story told long ago, at the very edge of the night, the hunter returns to the place where all of this began. The hunter's dream is quieter now. The workshop stands with its door slightly open, lamplight spilling onto the path. The old gravestones are still arranged in their familiar arcs, each one a doorway to a memory of the hunt. The plain doll waits near the central tree, hands folded, head bowed, as if listening to a song that is almost finished. Overhead, the sky is not the same red that hangs above Yhar'gul, yet it is not entirely free of its color either. The dream is a reflection, and reflections remember. You can picture the field behind the workshop the way you like best. Sometimes it is full of pale flowers, swaying gently in a breeze that never quite reaches your skin. Sometimes, after certain choices, it is burnt and charred, petals gone to ash. Tonight, we will hold the softer version, a sea of little white blossoms glowing faintly in the half-light. Their stems brush against your boots as you walk, making a sound like distant paper. At the far end of the field, beneath an old tree, German waits. He sits in his wooden wheelchair, the same way you first saw him, but there is a weight to his posture now that was not there at the beginning. The scythe he once used on hunts rests near his hand, its arc catching the dim light. When you approach, he raises his head and speaks in that familiar, weary voice. Good hunter, you've done well. The night is near its end. Now I will show you mercy. You will die, forget the dream, and awake under the morning sun. You will be freed from this terrible hunter's dream. In the game, these words introduce a choice. In this telling, you can imagine them simply as an offer held gently between you and him. After everything that Rom's broken veil has revealed, after Yahar'gul and Mensis and the Red Moon's work, German offers you something almost ordinary, an end, a mourning, and forgetfulness. One way, the story closes with that. If you accept, German rises, moves with surprising grace, and grants you a swift, merciful cut. There is no need to picture the blow. You can simply imagine the sensation of lying back among the flowers, the sky above you blurring from strange, layered light into something clearer. In the ending that follows, the hunter wakes on Yhar'gul street at dawn. Slumped against the steps where their journey began, the sun for once is gentle. The city is quiet. The hunter's dream recedes like a fading dream, and the hunter joins the many who will never know how close the night came to swallowing their world. It is the softest of the paths, in some ways. You forget the red moon. You forget Rom on her lake and the brain of Mensis hanging from its chains. You forget Ariana's pain and Queen Yharnam's bloody tears. You wake under the morning sun with no veil to maintain and no nightmare to patrol. Somewhere else, German and the dream and the great ones continue their own cycles, but you are freed from remembering them. There is another way, though, that the story can end. You can refuse his mercy. In that case, German sighs, stands, and lifts his scythe. The field of flowers becomes an arena, their soft petals bowing under the weight of each step. As hunter and first hunter move through patterns of steel and blood, the details of that duel can remain blurred in your mind. Two silhouettes circling beneath the tree, occasionally crossing, then drawing apart again. Eventually, German falls, his body folding into the blossoms he once tended. For a moment, the field is quiet. Then the air changes. The sky darkens. Something descends that does not belong to the world of men. Limbs like pale, boneless arms unfold from a too-thin torso. A head without a true face leans in close. This is the moon presence, the great one that bound German and made the dream its tool. It bends over the fallen first hunter, over you, and wraps itself around the victor. If the hunter has not prepared in any special way, the embrace ends with a new bond. German's body is removed to the workshop, where he will sit slumped in his chair as another dreamer. The field, once bright, grows darker, its flowers tinged with something like ash. The doll walks across the petals and finds the new figure curled where German once waited. She lifts their head, cradling them as she once did the first hunter, and whispers a greeting. The hunt will continue. New hunters will be drawn into the dream. The red moon may come again. Veils and rituals repeating in layers beyond counting. It is not a bad ending, exactly, but it is not a release. The hunter becomes what German was, caretaker and prisoner both, bound to the will of the formless presence that watches the dream from just beyond sight. You do not wake under the morning sun. You remain in the field of flowers while the world shifts and forgets you. There is, however, a hidden thread that allows for a different outcome, scattered through Yhar'gul, hidden in workshops, cradles, laboratories, and the aftermath of terrible births, lie the pieces of a rare thing. Third, umbilical cords. Each is a fragment of the connection between a great one and an infant, a relic left behind when that bond was broken or transformed. Taken together, they repeat the same unsettling truth. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. If the hunter finds and consumes enough of these cords before facing Gehrman, something inside them changes. Their mind, already lined with eyes from all they have seen, grows harder to grasp. When the moon presence descends after Gehrman's fall and tries to bind this hunter as it bound the first, the embrace does not take in quite the same way. Instead of a new servant, it meets resistance. In the final ending the game offers, that resistance takes the shape of a quiet, determined refusal. The hunter fights the moon presence itself in the flower field, under a sky that seems made entirely of silver and shadow. Each movement of the creature is strange, its limbs bending at angles that do not belong in human joints. And yet, slowly, the hunter wears it down. Eventually, the Great One collapses among the flowers, its influence on the dream broken. When the doll finds the hunter after this, the sight has changed again. There is no adult figure lying in the blossoms, no body ready to be lifted back into a chair. Instead, a small tentacled creature curls where the hunter once stood, an infant Great One, soft and new, with no clear distinction between its limbs and its mantle. The doll kneels, gathers it in her arms, and holds it gently. "Are you cold?" she asks. "Oh, good hunter." Outside the dream, the fate of Yhar'gul is left unspoken. Inside it, a cycle has broken and become something else. The hunter has not woken under the morning sun, nor have they taken Gehrman's place as caretaker. They have stepped sideways into the role the Great Ones themselves occupy, a being who may one day reach down through dreams and blood to seek a surrogate of their own. You can decide in your own mind whether that is an escape, an ascension, or simply a different kind of trap. The game does not answer. It offers three quiet conclusions: forgetfulness under a gentle dawn, weary stewardship of an endless hunt, or a transformation that turns the hunter into something Yhar'gul was never meant to see. Whichever ending you prefer, Rom's shadow stretches behind all of them. Without her, there would have been no single night where so many threads converged. Her presence on the lake before the moon kept the blood moon's full color from Yhar'gul, delayed the beckoning in Yahar'gul, and blurred the moment when Queen Yharnam, Mergo, Ariana, and the other blessed wombs all came into alignment. The School of Mensis still would have reached for a Great One. The healing church still would have misused the old blood. Eden still would have drifted through the veins of the faithful. But it was Rom who held the curtain between almost and now for as long as she could. When you think back over this night, you can follow the line she left from the college balcony and the still lake, to the moment the veil shattered and the sky turned red. From the unseen village and its corpse-built god, to the brain of Mensis and its dangerous eyes. From the cries in the loft and Ariana's hidden tunnel, to the field of flowers where one last choice waits. At every step, the same pattern repeats. Humans straining toward the great ones yearning toward humans, and something fragile and sacrificial placed in between. Rom was one of those fragile things. Perhaps she chose that role. Perhaps she was made for it without consent. The game stays quiet on that point. It only shows the consequences of her existence and her death. A city that wakes to its true sky for one terrible night, and a hunter who walks through the gap that follows. As this story dwindles, you don't need to keep all its detail. You can let most of it drift away, like petals blown off the field in the dream, if there is anything to hold on to. As you fall asleep, it might be something as simple as this: a lake, a spider, a red moon, a city that did not know how close it stood to the edge, and a hunter who in one form or another found a way to see what lay beyond the veil. The rest can settle into the dark, like a nightmare that has finally been given permission to end.